Prime Minister Mark Carney went to the World Economic Forum and spoke about new world orders and middle powers exercising what power they have in this so called new world order. But in contrast to what US President Donald Trump, Carney's speech received a lot of praise. But how is it being perceived now? Hello, everyone. I'm Adrienne Batra. With me are Brian Lilley and Lorrie Goldstein. I wonder, Brian, Carney got a lot of good headlines for his speech at the WEF. I mean, look, he's speaking to a crowd he's comfortable with, a very receptive crowd to his message. He spoke about the middle powers. He talked about New World Order. He talked about an end to the sort of the international rules-based cooperation. And I put it in the context of, had President Trump spoken first, would Carney's message have been different in light of the fact that Trump says, no, there won't be any military aggression in Greenland? Yes, we are getting a framework with NATO on increasing US presence in Greenland. I'm wondering from your take.
No, I think this is the speech that Carney would have given no matter what. And I'm not a fan of it, but I appear to be in the minority in Canada's media, which is not only fawning all over Carney and his speech, but also fawning all over the fact that liberals around the world really like his speech because he rebuked Donald Trump. Of course, he never named Donald Trump. He never named the United States. In fact, let me read to you one portion of his speech. He said, "The powerful have their power, but we have something too, the capacity to stop pretending, to name reality. This is Canada's path. We choose it openly and confidently." Except he didn't name. And he talked about the need to push back against the powerful. He rebuked the powerful and those who bend the rules. We all knew that he was talking about the United States and Donald Trump. But despite saying that he chooses it confidently and openly and names reality, never named anyone. You know, and you compare this to how he reacts when he is around Donald Trump. He's slavish in his praise. He's goes over the top in praising Donald Trump, and then when he talks about the American president when he's not around him, like he did in Beijing, announcing his deal with China, or at his speech at the WEF, he is constantly taking shots at him. It's a horrible way to run diplomacy. I know that it's being applauded because an awful lot of Canadians just want to poke America in the eye. I don't see what this accomplishes.
Lori, there was a former prime minister of Canada that grabbed all the attention at Davos over 10 years ago with fawning headlines and just, oh, the anti Trump. And of course, that was then Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. We all know how that turned out after a decade's worth of power. But I think the challenge for Carney is those words may have been chosen specifically. It may have been obviously he's got a very different tone and tenor than Donald Trump. I don't think that that's the comparison. It's the language used. It's what was said. Carney's challenge is that the rhetoric has to match the action, and the action in Canada isn't coming to fruition, building at speeds faster than we've ever seen before. None of this is matching, but it also doesn't set us up well to do the one thing that he was importantly elected on, and that was to get a trade deal with the United States. I don't see how any of what he said opens that door up again.
Well, he's been moving the goalposts ever since he became prime minister. I think look, Carney is a very smart man. There's no doubt about it. Politically, for him, that was an astute speech, helping him in Canada. And look, Canadians love it when the foreign media praises our prime ministers. It's a mark of our own security that we don't judge our prime ministers on how we feel about them, but if the New York Times says he's good, he must be good. What did he do strategically? Just a few weeks ago, he was being very moderate in terms of his reactions to Venezuela, the American invasion and getting rid of the dictator, and in Greenland. In both those things at the time, he didn't name Trump. All he said was, very reasonably, We support the right of self-determination for the people of Venezuela and the people of Greenland and Denmark, right? And he got hammered in the Canadian media. He got called incompetent. He got called a coward. It was so bad, Adrienne, that I defended him in a column. I said, come on, people. He has a responsibility to the Canadian people to get a deal with Trump. It does nothing good for him to say something that everybody else is saying. Now, the second part is what Brian centered on. Okay, we want to increase our trade in other parts of the world. Agreed. But to say that, to not make the distinction between the United States and China and Russia, to me was appalling. His goal is to double our trade within a decade or something with non-American sources. That's great. But when you go to Davos, which is a luxurious ski resort, and you say that, well, we've made a deal with China for what, 3% of our EVs to come into Canada? Come on, Prime Minister. We do 75% of our exports with China. And yes, you can say in the releases, now we have to go to our second largest trading nation, which is China. We do 5% of our trade with China. And Russia, the stuff about he's changing the international order and all that, really? Are Europe going to stop buying Russian natural gas because of Carney's speech? Of course not. And I think it was Brian who observed when he talks about these, we have to do this and that. We can't do unilateral negotiations. Well, his deal with China was a one-on-one. That's what you have to do. It's called diplomacy. So to me, and the other thing to me was that, remember, he already said this. Remember that speech where he said the relationship with the United States was broken? But that was only covered in Canada. Now he goes to Davos and he basically says the same thing, and everybody goes berserk. It's nice to have a prime minister who's respected internationally. That's a plus. But it comes back to the thing, how does this... He said at the election, people will judge me by the price of food, the price of electricity, and the price of housing. He said that's how he should be judged. How did any of that show in Davos get us any further towards those goals?
Brian, we would be remiss if we didn't touch on what happened last week with Prime Minister Carney and working with China and establishing new trade frameworks and taking off tariffs and whatnot. We have, our premier in Ontario, Doug Ford, the premier of the largest province in the country, an economic engine of the country, talking about how dare we do this? These spy cars are going to be wandering the streets of Canada. And Premier Ford also talked about the fact that he didn't hear about any drop in tariffs, any sort of deal until moments before it happened. It's instructive and it's important because the need to establish more trade corridors for Canada we all agree on that, but the pushback on this deal with China, the opposition to it seems to be growing.
Well, I mean, Doug Ford was out this week with Lana Payne, who is the head of Unifor, which represents auto workers. By the way, they also represent myself and other writers at the Toronto Sun. He was out with Flavio Volpe from the Canadian Auto Parts Manufacturing Association, Brian Kingston from the Canadian Vehicles Association. This is, heavy hitters that are often standing side by side with Prime Minister Carney, saying, hey, this is a bad idea. It's not 3% of Canada's EVs that we're letting in. We're letting in 3% of our total cars sold to be Chinese EVs, 49,000. It will grow year after year. If you look at Europe, if you look at Brazil, where China's EVs have been widely accepted, well, Volkswagen's laying off staff They're laying off workers because sales are down. They have taken about almost 11% of the total European car sales in just, I think a year ago, they were at about 2.5% of cars sold in the European Union. Then by mid-year, they were at 6%. And by the end of the year, 10.7%. They are 36% of all imported cars sold in Brazil. Brazil makes twice as many vehicles as we do. So there's a reason that Doug Ford is concerned about this. They are heavily subsidized vehicles. And the whole spy thing, some of my colleagues in the media just keep mocking this idea. Well, the British military, British defense contractors have warned their staff, if you drive one of these, don't bring it to work. Don't connect your phone to it. Park 2 miles away is what they said to, if you have to drive this car to work, park 2 miles away. You may as well just walk to work then or take the bus. Israel had been working with Chinese EVs. They'd been giving them out to their officers. They provide their officers with families, vehicles, and they were giving out this 7-passenger SUV that's also an EV made in China. Well, they've canceled those leases. They are getting rid of them and saying the same thing. Don't connect your vehicle. China has the same view of Teslas that are, for people in China. They don't want Teslas being near there. There are real concerns about these vehicles with so many sensors and a tech stack that is sitting off in a foreign country that is hostile to us, that has a reputation for spying. So there's a lot of reasons for this. It probably also won't help us with negotiations with the Americans. And that, you can say, well, to hell with Trump. That will be the same if the Democrats take the midterms and sweep Congress. That will be the same if the Democrats win the White House. There is a bipartisan consensus in Washington against China now.
Mm-hmm. Lori, last word to you. All of this idea of spying and Chinese tech being infiltrated all around the world, quite frankly. I mean, just a side note to that, the Canadian contingent, any Canadian contingent that ever goes over to China, they have to take burner phones, new phones, because the Chinese spy. They look at what they did with our labs in Winnipeg. This is they take intellectual property. This is what they do. They infiltrate and then they take things back to their country from us. The spy balloon. Who could forget about that one? So I think that the concerns are real and legitimate. Not to mention China's record on human rights, the Uyghurs, in things that they do to their own citizens with their social credit scores. All of these things don't comport with so-called Canadian values. But it appears that all of that is being put aside purely to get for Carney to attempt to try to look like we are opening up trade corridors to other countries.
Well, look, for Brian being mocked for security concerns, it's like we've all forgotten the foreign interference inquiry. It's like doublethink. Um, and one of the things, look, I understand the practical aspect of the deal. He had canola in the West, because of the our 100% tariff on Chinese vehicles resulted in 100% on canola. So he had to balance national interests. Okay, that's a tough call. That's what he was elected for. I get that. But during his first part of this trip that ended in Davos was in China, and he starts saying things like, our relations with China are more predictable than those with the United States. And President Xi and I had a good discussion about Arctic sovereignty. What is he saying?
Lori, China considers itself a near Arctic power. I believe the first publication in the Western world to put that on their front page was the Toronto Sun back in 2010, before President Hu's visit. And in the Ottawa Bureau, David Aiken spotted a piece on that and said, get that on the front page. This is crazy. China sees itself as an Arctic power. And Mark Carney, by saying that, was giving some legitimacy to it.
They see, and that's the point. Reporters who were with him said, we're all on burner phones. We're all on burner phones. And so to me, it's simply that, look, he's going to criticize America, fine. But the failing of me of that whole trip was that if you want to talk about our relationship is different with the United States, that's obvious. But do it in the context of the world, as he likes to say, as it is. Because if you look at the Arctic, in Canada, we have a choice. Three superpowers are after the minerals in the Arctic and also the Northwest Passage because of the transportation. It's the United States, China, and Russia. Which one do you want to ally yourself with? I think the answer is pretty obvious, but when I hear Mr. Carney, it doesn't seem obvious to him.
Can I just say one quick thing, Adrienne, before we go? Because we didn't talk about Trump and his comments about Canada being ungrateful. Um, you know, we can talk about both speeches. They were both bad. Trump's wasn't even a speech. He stood up and ranted for about an hour. He did not look at his notes. He should have had the Festivus poll with him for his airing of grievances, which is really what he was doing. But you know, Trump was saying he didn't like Carney's speech. That's fine. If you're going to take shots at the U.S. president, expect return fire. Both of them were bad speeches for us, and people shouldn't be shocked in Canada when the U.S. president responds to someone giving a 15-minute speech all about him.
Well, we certainly know that Mark Carney is a great wordsmith, but will that rhetoric match actions for Canadians? Only time will tell. Let us know what you think in the comments below. Like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel and go to the torontosun.com. You'll find commentary and coverage there you will not find anywhere else.